Imagine a noblewoman. Her story isn't found in any official history, but she's real in the way that all victims are real. She's a stand-in for the countless women of the Ottoman elite whose fates were decided not in a courtroom, but in a public square. The first thing she would have felt wasn't the shame. It was the grit of the ground against her skin. Then came the sound, 100,000 voices, a single, roaring beast hungry for a show. She's being dragged into the center of the world, her silk dress tearing on the cobblestones. This isn't an execution. That would be a mercy. This is a performance, a carefully staged ritual of public degradation. As the empire watches, her fate is about to reveal a dark secret, that on its grandest stages, justice wasn't always about law. It was about breaking a person so completely that their ruin became a warning, etched into the memory of all who saw it. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire was a titan, a nexus of culture, law, and military might stretching across 3 continents. Its mosques pierced the sky, its markets teemed with the wealth of nations, and its laws were shaped by brilliant minds like Suleiman the Magnificent. But beneath the surface of this God-given order lay a far more brutal truth. A system of control that wasn't just written in law books, but performed in public. This wasn't a flaw in the system, it was the system. How did an empire at the height of its power turn public humiliation into an instrument of the state? The fate of women like our noblewoman, a story pieced together from the silent gaps in official histories, unlocks the dark mechanics of how the Ottomans used their grandest stages to enforce absolute control. This is the story of how an empire perfected the art of breaking its subjects, not just their bodies, but their spirit, for all the world to see. The main stage for this drama was a place already ancient, soaked in the memory of spectacle, the Hippodrome of Constantinople. Built by the Romans, it was the heart of Byzantine life, a place of thunderous chariot races and imperial ceremony. When Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror took the city in 1453, he didn't tear it down. He understood its power. The Ottomans renamed it the At-Maidani, the Horse Square, and repurposed it. The chariot races were long gone, but its soul remained the same. It was a vessel for imperial power, a place where the Sultan could gather, address, and, most importantly, intimidate his people. The very architecture of the space was a monument to dominion. At its heart stood the obelisk of Thutmose III, carved from granite in Egypt in the 15th century BCE. It was ripped from its home in Karnak by the Roman Emperor Theodosius in 390 CE and raised here. Nearby stood the Serpent Column, a strange, bronze monument of 3 intertwined snakes, forged to celebrate a Greek victory over the Persians at Plataea in 479 BCE, and moved here from the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. These ancient relics, witnesses to fallen empires, now served as props in the theater of a new one. This was a space designed for the masses to become a single entity, a unified audience. The cheers for a festival could just as easily become the jeers for a condemned prisoner. The Sultan understood this alchemy. In the At-Maidani, the roar of the crowd amplified the state's message, turning punishment from a private affair into a public lesson. But the square was just the symbolic heart of the system. The Ottoman state saw itself as the Devletay Ebed Muddit, the eternal state. Its survival was everything, and any threat had to be neutralized not just efficiently, but visibly. Justice was a performance, and every punishment was a scene in a long-running play about the futility of resistance. The legal framework was a sophisticated mix of Islamic Sharia law and the Sultan's own secular decrees, known as canon. This gave the state incredible flexibility. While Sharia guided daily life, canon gave the Sultan authority to act for the sake of public order, a power that could justify almost anything. Punishments were designed for maximum psychological impact. It wasn't enough to execute a traitor. Their head had to be displayed on a spike at the gates of the Topkapi Palace. A thief might have a hand amputated in a busy market at midday. The pain was secondary to the message, "This is the price of disorder." This wasn't random savagery, it was a deeply embedded, carefully managed institution, the grim machinery that kept the eternal state turning. No group embodied the Ottoman monopoly on violence more than the Janissaries. They were the Sultan's elite troops, Europe's first modern standing army, and the most feared institution in the empire besides the Sultan himself. Created through the Devşirme system, a levy of Christian boys from the Balkans, they were converted to Islam, stripped of family ties, and forged into a brotherhood loyal only to the Sultan. For centuries, that loyalty made the Ottomans nearly invincible. But power, once created, is hard to contain. By the 17th century, the Janissaries had become a force unto themselves. They were kingmakers and kingbreakers. Their barracks were a hornet's nest of political intrigue, and their control of Istanbul's streets was absolute. They were the enforcers of the Sultan's punishments, but they also delivered their own brutal justice. A shopkeeper who overcharged them or a vizier who tried to reform them could find themselves at the mercy of a Janissary mob. Their presence transformed the city into a zone of latent terror. The same Janissaries who marched in magnificent parades for the Sultan could, hours later, be seen dragging a suspect through the mud, their verdict delivered by the cold steel of their swords. They became a state within a state. They might protect a sultan one day and depose him the next. In 1622, when Sultan Osman II tried to curb their power, they dragged him from his palace, humiliated him publicly, and had him strangled in the infamous Yedikule fortress. The message was terrifyingly clear, not even the shadow of God on earth was safe from their wrath. The empire, in creating the perfect instrument of force, had unleashed a monster it couldn't control. The Janissaries represented institutional cruelty, a constant, simmering threat that kept both commoners and the ruling elite in a state of perpetual anxiety. It created a dual system of fear, the calculated, top-down terror of the state, and the chaotic, bottom-up terror of its own enforcers. A citizen of Istanbul had to navigate both. The Ottoman state didn't just punish, it produced spectaculars that blurred the line between celebration, justice, and terror. The grandest of these were imperial festivals. In 1582, Sultan Murad III held a circumcision ceremony for his son that was anything but private. It was a 55-day extravaganza in the At Meidani, with parades, mock battles, fireworks, and feasts for the whole city. But woven into this celebration was the threat of power. The same arena hosting acrobats also featured Janissary drills, a beautiful but chilling reminder of the force underpinning the festivities. The festival showcased the Sultan's wealth and generosity, but most of all, his authority. It was masterful public relations, reinforcing the idea that the Sultan was the sole provider of both joy and order. But this coin had two sides. The same crowds that gathered for a festival could be summoned for a very different kind of performance. Public punishments were often staged to coincide with moments of political tension. A rebellious governor might be paraded through Istanbul in chains and beheaded before a massive crowd. The state also perfected the art of shaming. Adultery, for instance, was often punished through public humiliation. While extreme punishments like stoning were exceptionally rare in Ottoman history, other forms of degradation were not. An accused person might be paraded backward on a donkey, their face blackened with soot, forced to endure the jeers of their neighbors. This wasn't about physical pain, it was about social annihilation. It was about stripping away a person's honor and identity until all that remained was the crime itself. This tactic was used with chilling precision against the families of political enemies. A noblewoman from a powerful family that fell out of favor was a potent symbol. To disgrace her was to disgrace her entire lineage. She could be stripped of her titles, her property confiscated, or made the centerpiece of a public ritual of degradation, a living effigy of her family's downfall. This is where the story of our noblewoman in the Hippodrome finds its meaning. She represents the elite women used as pawns in a brutal game of power. While chroniclers focused on sultans and viziers, the stories of their wives, sisters, and daughters were often overlooked. Yet their public humiliation was a critical tool. By targeting the women of a rival faction, the sultan could inflict a wound deeper than any execution. He could taint their bloodline and destroy their honor. Her suffering in the center of the arena was a message to every other powerful family: no one is untouchable. Your honor, your legacy, your women, they are all held at the sultan's pleasure. For over 2 centuries, the Ottoman state was held hostage by the Janissaries. They resisted every reform, clung to their privileges, and bled the treasury dry. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II decided the institution had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. He knew this couldn't be a quiet affair. To kill the Janissaries, he had to turn the state's entire machinery of spectacle against them. He secretly created a new, European-style army. When the Janissaries got wind of it, they did what they always did: they revolted. On June 15, 1826, they overturned their ceremonial soup cauldrons in the At-Midani, their traditional signal for rebellion, and marched on the palace. But this time, Mahmud was ready. He unfurled the sacred banner of the Prophet Muhammad, a relic rarely seen outside the palace, and called upon the people of Istanbul to rise up against the traitors. It was a masterful stroke of political theater. He transformed a military coup into a holy war, framing the Janissaries not as rebels, but as enemies of the faith. What followed was an extermination. The Janissary barracks were surrounded and bombarded with artillery. The wooden buildings caught fire, and those not killed by cannonballs were burned alive. The streets of Istanbul ran with blood as loyalist forces and vengeful citizens hunted down any Janissary they could find. Thousands were killed. The At-Midani, so often the stage for their power, had been the catalyst for their annihilation. Mahmud named the event the Vakei Hayrai, the auspicious incident. The name itself was propaganda, framing a brutal massacre as a blessed event. In a single, bloody day, the Sultan reclaimed the state's monopoly on violence. He did it by turning the Janissaries' own methods against them, using overwhelming public force and righteous spectacle to erase them from the empire. The institution of cruelty had turned on itself and, in a final, convulsive act of violence, consumed its own masters of terror. So what became of the noblewoman dragged into the Hippodrome? As we said, history doesn't record her name. She is a ghost, an embodiment of all those whose personal ruin was used as a public lesson. She is the wife of a disgraced pasha, the daughter of a rebellious chieftain, every woman whose honor was sacrificed on the altar of state power. Her ordeal in the center of that roaring arena represents the fundamental truth of this system of control. For all its laws, art, and grandeur, the Ottoman Empire was, in part, built on a foundation of fear. That fear was maintained through carefully staged performances of cruelty. The public square wasn't just a gathering place, it was a classroom where the curriculum was pain. The message was brutally effective: the state is absolute. It has the power to elevate you to unimaginable heights, and the power to break you so completely that your name is wiped from memory. The Hippodrome is quiet now. Tourists walk where crowds once roared, taking pictures of the ancient obelisks that stood silent witness to it all. The screams have faded, the blood washed away by centuries of rain. But the logic of that system, the use of public shaming as a tool of control, is hardly a relic of the past. The human impulse to create and consume spectacles of degradation remains. The story of the empire's grand theater of cruelty is more than a dark chapter in history. It's a timeless reminder of how easily the institutions of justice can become instruments of terror, and how the roar of a crowd can be used to drown out the silence of the condemned. It forces us to ask, when we watch a public downfall, are we ever just innocent bystanders? The history of empires is filled with these calculated displays of power. What other examples of institutionalized cruelty from history do you find the most chilling? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to explore more of the dark and complex truths hidden in the past, make sure to subscribe and press the notification bell for more documentaries.